Hello and welcome to the podcast where we explore everything about game economy design, game balance, and monetization. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Felix, who absolutely knows his stuff when it comes to ad-based monetization. Felix, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and who you are.
Hi, my name is Felix. I've been in the industry for close to 8 years. I've worked in two DSPs, one ad network, and then I jumped across the fence to manage the ad monetization for several large-scale publishers. I've managed games including Tetris, Side Games, a couple of other studios, and for the last couple of years I've been working as a consultant, helping out a bunch of companies do this on their own. But altogether, the companies that I've managed since I've been a consultant have earned about $350 million in ad revenue. So that's how
Is
I
that all?
learned. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So that's how I learned a lot about this dirty underbelly that is ad monetization.
Exactly, and I think let's get into some meat for that, because you went straight in and said one of the phrases that a lot of folks who read the book or get involved in this won't necessarily understand, the term DSP. What does that mean, and why does it matter?
Okay, so let's go back in time. Let's just maybe start with a story, right? And because
Yes.
people love stories, right? So if we go back to 2008, when both app stores got launched, the App Store got launched with the original 50 or 500 apps. 2 years later,
Yeah.
the Google App Store launched. So I think it was about the year after the App Store launched, it was suddenly 250,000 apps. Then it was 1 million. It grew unbelievably quick, right? And the crazy thing about this is that neither Google or Apple could foresee how big of a success it would be. And one of the things that went horribly wrong when the app stores was actually discoverability. How do you actually build a company on the App Store? And basically, how do you get users? You can still see this today. And you
Well,
open...
I'm gonna jump in there because, as somebody I was part of the prior generation running the mobile operator app stores,
Yeah.
and we were the most, three was the most successful in the world in terms of revenue per user, because we managed the content pipeline. And Apple made a decision not to manage the pipeline, which turns out to be the right one, by the way. But what that means is it left, like you say, this gap of discoverability. I was able to manage discoverability because I was adding games and taking them off. They were not taking games off. They were not prioritizing other than through algorithms. How on earth do you get discovered in that context? Now, sorry, I'm interrupting, but I think that's a useful context to kind of
No, it's
remind
fine.
us that
Yeah.
these are really kind of like major decisions that they made that transitioned the whole way the industry operates and needed a mechanism to resolve.
Yeah. I mean, Apple and Google both solved it, they thought, by basically crowning a couple of people in their organizations to be part of their featuring team,
Yeah.
which probably was the best taken care of people in the world for about 5 to 10 years. But essentially, it's not really a good idea to grow a business just based on a few people. And that's when AdMob, which was basically a company founded in Silicon Valley. They served the first ad inside of an application in 2007. And in 2009, they got bought by Google to basically solve this problem, how you solve discoverability. And that is to show ads inside of other apps and basically get downloads that way. Currently on the app stores, 45 to 50% of downloads come from paid searches, or not paid searches, but paid traffic instead of organics. And that's what ad monetization is, right? So basically, ad monetization is managing ads inside of your app and basically turning you as a game developer or a game developer into a publisher, which means that you show ads to earn money from basically monetizing the user base. So that's what ad monetization is in its core. You asked at the start of this story, what is a DSP and what is an ad network? So let's go into that, because basically these are the two main forms of different organizations or things that essentially buy the traffic when you are a game developer. So a DSP is something called a demand-side platform. That means that they don't own the actual relationship or the end relationship with the publisher or the game developer, but they buy it on open RTB. So basically, they don't own any of their own supply, but they buy it on basically an exchange. And that's different from an ad network because they're the ones who sticks their SDK and have the direct developer relationship. And essentially what they do is they take about half of the demand and they sell it off to these DSPs or exchanges to basically earn more money. Networks tend to earn about 36% from an impression by doing this. So basically, the two main forms of demand inside of, or the money that you earn from having an application from showing ads, either comes from a DSP or an ad network. That's where I started to work. Yeah.
Well, let's just, I mean, just want to just explore that a little bit further, because this is a language that having worked in ad space since 2014, probably earlier than that, actually, thinking about 2011, I think is when I first started doing stuff with Papaya Mobile, which wasn't quite the same, but it had connections. I still, to this day, get it wrong between what the definition of demand and supply is from the perspective of the ad networks. Could you define that for us?
Yeah. So demand is quite simple. Let's say Oscar Clark has $100 that he wants to buy users with. He goes to an ad network or a DSP and says, I'm willing to buy 100 users at $1 CPI, and basically goes to spend it. Oscar Clark, in that sense, is demand. Let's say Oscar Clark also has the same app and he wants to basically monetize his users. He can also plug in and start showing ads to his users, and then he will earn money from that demand. In reality, it's a bit more complicated because it's, billions and billions of dollars that are transacting every day. I've heard it estimated, I think it's about $48 million a day on the app stores that's getting earned. So it's quite a lot, but probably an order of magnitude larger than that's getting spent. So it's huge sums of money that's driving this app economy that's estimated to be close to $200 billion by now. So it's a massive, massive business.
Huge business. And I think this whole principle about the way that it's targeted, the way that it's spent, the way that the supply is structured so that it's attractive, that you can attribute to an audience, all these questions, things like real-time bidding processes, which I think is what you meant by RTB. I assume so. These are techniques that are becoming more and more normalized. I mean, I remember when real-time bidding was introduced as this is the next thing, and that's not that long ago, and it's now so default. It's part of your language instinctively, which I thought was fascinating. So let's kind of think about this in structure. So now we're coming at it from the point of view of we're trying to monetize the game. That's the kind of fundamental structure. Are there kind of like prerequisites? Particularly, I'm thinking about inventory. So where are we going to place the ad? How are we going to deal with the ad? What are the prerequisites for the inventory? How much of that comes down to whether we're talking about interstitial, and probably ought to define these things, by the way, as well. Interstitials, rewarded, and other kind of characteristics of the ad. So I've said a lot of words there. Do you want to kind of go into that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. In mobile gaming or in mobile applications, however you want to call it, there's three main ad units that drive significant amount of downloads. And these are the kind of holy trinity of ad monetization. If you want to earn any ad revenue, you need to touch at least two or three of these to have any serious ad revenue. And that is banner ads, which are these small 120 by 90 at the bottom that you see. They don't get that much payouts. Maybe you're looking at a couple of cents on eCPM globally. Then you have the interstitial ad unit, which is a splash screen that covers the whole screen at a random point. That's not opt-in. Basically, the developer decides you need to watch this. And basically, those tend to run from anything between 5 to 15 seconds. Can be unskippable or skippable, depending if you feel like it as a developer. And then you have the kind of best ad unit or the most appreciated ad unit in mobile gaming, which is the rewarded ad. And essentially, a rewarded ad is a trade-off that you let your users have. Essentially, you watch an ad for 30 seconds, and in exchange, I give you something in the game. Currency, speed-ups, anything like that. And these three ad units are the main ad units that are used in mobile games and in mobile overall. And rewarded has the highest eCPM because it's the longest and also shows intent, which means that the user is actually, hey, I'm interested to watch an ad for 30 seconds. People assume that they have better attention span for those ads. Rewarded eCPMs tend to be around $30 in the States, $15 worldwide. Interstitials tend to be around 15, 20 in the States, and around maybe 7 to 12 worldwide. And banners, it's really hard to say, but globally, maybe like if you look at Brazil or India, maybe it's 1 cent eCPM for these banner ads. And in the States, it can be up to $2 or $3 depending on the user.
We should probably talk about what eCPM means specifically, so estimated cost per meal or per thousand. But it's essentially a kind of arbitrary number to mediate between the fact that often the charging for an ad is based on the eyeballs. The payout for receiving the eyeballs tends to be on the install. Is that a fair way of describing, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, we can go even a step further back and go. So ad revenue is essentially a mix of two components. And ad revenue essentially is down to fill rate, which is how much of your inventory you can actually sell to a network. And then you also have the ECPM, the effective cost per melee. That's what you're getting paid by the networks for 1,000 impressions. So those are the two main things. So I would happily take a lower ECPM if it meant a higher fill rate, right? And that playing around with these gets you a higher ad revenue. So yeah, that's what that means.
And this was fundamentally important when I was working at Unity Ads, because we were very much focused on making sure our fill rate was around 95% level, which I think at the time was one of the highest out there. We actually did at the early days find ways to subsidize that process to make sure our fill rate was there. A system I know other ad networks, particularly those who are up and coming, do also adopt, but it's a risky process for an ad network to pull off, because you're essentially making your market share less valuable because you're trying to grow your market share, if that makes sense. But I think these kind of things are really kind of tricky. And like I say, I think your point about fill rate matters. As a developer, as a game developer, what actually can we do about our fill rate?
Really good question. So we can go into that. So let's talk a bit what a developer can do, first of all, on the ECPM side and then on the fill rate side. And then I think we should tap that off with game design for ad monetization.
I definitely want to come back to game design as well.
So fill rate, when I started working, was a thing that we talked more about. Exactly like you said now, the app economy has gotten so sophisticated that fill rate is not really an issue anymore. But when I was starting out, sometimes you're getting 70, 60% fill rate, and that was considered good. Today, having anything below 95% fill rate is considered very, very unusual. And the only thing you can kind of do is basically set up a mediation platform where you can have several different networks that basically bid for your inventory. Right now, if you have maybe 10,000 DAU and you set up a mediation with 5 to 6 networks, you will sell 95% of your inventory. That's no problem. Then there comes the thing about ECPM. So what can you do as a developer to affect ECPM? So ECPM is it's quite an interesting market because we don't set prices anymore. That's being done by the open bidding, what we talked about, right? So we have moved away from placements and waterfall to something called header bidding. So that means that mobile ad inventory is probably the only industry I can think of where basically we're price takers and not price setters. So what you can do here is you can work with several different networks and basically they compete, and that drastically increases your ECPM. But aside from that, there's not that much you can really do to stimulate your ECPM anymore. It's just adding a lot of demand. But if you take a step back and think about how ECPM is calculated, and essentially different networks have access to different data that they can use to estimate how much a user is worth. Google uses 94 different factors. Temperature of your location is one of them. So basically all these things factor into the ECPM. Google.
I had no idea. Temperature of your location is a factor.
But they have the most data, right? So Google is the one AppLovin uses 71, I've heard, where the biggest emphasis is on device type, because essentially that indicates a lot about you, like how much you can spend, or if you're an ad user or not. Iron Source uses 61. It's all different, right? But the main things that these algorithms all have access to, that is the most important thing, is a couple of things. So it's basically, it looks at a rolling 7-day average of what the inventory they see in your app is doing. So what is actually looking at? It's looking at CTR, how often a click-through is happened from their ads in your app. It looks at the amount of unique users they can reach, how many impressions have been served to that user before on the day. And if you think about it, that's something called a recency effect. So basically, networks assume that if it's the first impression of the day, a user has more attention than if you're serving the 12th impression. So basically, it goes down linearly. Usually after 5 impressions, you start really seeing a per unit cost decrease. Also, the amount of installs that they've generated from your app, all these factors basically come together and basically decide what ECPM they're willing to pay. So the only thing you can really do on this is kind of design a game that has a lot of unique users, or basically has a lot of purchasers, and that will increase your eCPM. Also geolocation, of course, very important.
But I think some things you hinted in there, as for example, the incentives that we're creating for a player to care about, for example, where it's a rewarded ad, could play a significant part. If we're just getting in as creating a barrier to access to play and it's annoying the player, we're not really setting them up to be receptive to whatever that ad may or may not be. And, the behavior of a player to just turn the phone upside down while they're waiting for the ad to play, becomes a barrier to our ability to be able to monetize that audience. I mean, I would argue, but we'll get to design later. We'll come back to design aspects.
I would actually take the opposite on that opinion, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Oh, yeah.
It's true, right? But Oscar is different from Felix, right? We're different people.
Yes.
And essentially, what kind of one of the hottest topic has been recently in ad monetization is segmentation. And that means you show different types of users, different types of experiences. So while Oscar might have that opinion that he doesn't want to annoy the user, Felix, who likes interstitial ads and doesn't mind it, you might want to show him a lot more. So everyone's different, and basically segmentation and designing that in a clever way is a better way of thinking about it, I think.
I think that makes a lot of sense, actually, yeah. I mean, again, I'm coming at it from crafting as a design-focused person, but you're absolutely right that the differences. For example, one of the things I was surprised at in the hyper-casual scene, although I know that's mostly past, it didn't occur to me how useful having an ad forced upon you would be to stop you from burning out. And it turned out that the thing that you tell people you hate is actually what motivated you, or at least provide you the lubrication to keep playing.
Exactly.
And I think that really feeds into your point there.
Yeah.
Talking about segmentation, I think the segmentation, in fact, these data points in general are really interesting. A lot of them are going to be a factor, or at least a resonant element based on the engagement of the player with the game generally. I'm not saying there's a direct one-to-one correlation. You've very clearly explained one way that isn't the case, but there will generally be some level of engagement with the game that reflects in the way that their behavior may or may not be in terms of ad response. But we also have a bunch of problems in terms of data capture. Now, post IDFA in particular, so IDFA was the ID for advertisers, which was an Apple piece. It was removed in 2015, has had some longer term consequences. I think COVID maybe hid some of the longer term consequences, arguably. But what it's meant is that there have been differences in the way that we opt in, the way that we engage, the level of data, and the gaps. I think probably the most interesting, or at least problematic thing, is the gaps in the data and the consequences that has had on our ability to interpret other data. Anyway, lots of things about data. How do you feel about where we are in terms of the balance between privacy, data, and its use in ads?
So I kind of believe, or I think, that the IDFA and the GID were private enough because there's no personal identifiable information, right? And basically, Google has held on to the GID for a long time. They haven't really announced yet what the privacy sandbox solution will be. I am in the kind of camp that Apple got rid of the IDFA not because of privacy. They more did it because they wanted control and basically shift people from using third-party networks inside of their app store to basically charging these themselves and having Apple search ads. So when they removed Apple search or IDFA, basically everyone was opted out of the IDFA except for Apple search ads, which still has access to it, right? So if you go on your phone now, you see that basically where you could opt out of being or having an IDFA before, it's now opting out for Apple search ads. So the IDFA hasn't gone away. It's just gone away for everyone but Apple. So it's now we're kind of getting to the dirty underbelly of how ad monetization works, because it's the last bastion of the Wild West in mobile, I tend to say. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind of. Like, Apple's not a benevolent organization. They're publicly traded. They will do whatever is best for shareholders.
Exactly. And I'm glad you said that, not me. But no, I think that's actually the point, isn't it? It's the if you look at, even if you looked at the difference between Apple's statement when you are opting into data, when it's their application, it's we can improve your experience. When it's someone else's application, is these people are going to steal your lives. I'm obviously making that a little bit more emotionally charged, but not that far off. So I think we do, though, I think as a result, live in a world where some of the ad networks maybe don't necessarily have the same scale of data that they once had. And I think more importantly, the mean, so the average data points within those is slanted because of the specific characteristics of the missing data. We've witnessed a significant increase in cost of acquisition as a direct result, but I haven't seen the same compensatory increase in revenue. In fact, quite the opposite. I've seen equally a decline in net revenue from ads. Am I isolated in that, or what do you think is going on there?
I know exactly what's going on, Oscar.
I know that's
So,
why I
yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to talk about it.
So basically, what we talked about before, so how mediation used to be done by
Yeah.
publishers was that you set something called price floors, right? So you didn't accept
Yeah.
prices to be like for ads that were lower than X. Now we've moved into something called header bidding, where basically everything is decided algorithmically. During the same time period when basically we passed like bidders being responsible for about 70 to 80%, I also saw eCPMs decrease by about 30%. And if you think about it, there's nothing holding up these prices anymore. So they kind of started to decrease. And eCPMs I've seen from several large organizations that have shared this with me, that it's kind of an industry-wide phenomenon. But also at the same time, CPIs increased, right? So you have eCPMs decreasing, publishers getting paid less, and CPIs are increasing. So where is all this value going? It's in the middle.
Yes.
So the networks are soaking this up.
The network is soaking it up, and I think this is a major problem because a major problem for game developers. Sorry, it's not necessarily a major problem if you're an ad network, obviously, but it's. I think the reason we're kind of being cut from both ends, particularly if you're a mobile game publisher, because you're both trying to generate revenue from ads, but you're also trying to find the sweet spot of getting the install rate to such a level where you have a sustainable game experience. And but at the same time, I think a lot of the ad networks that we had have started to change the way that the ads are delivered. Back in my day, we worked out that actually a 20-second ad was more effective than a 30-second ad. That was just what we experienced. However, we ended up going with the 30-second ad because the ad creatives, the ad teams inside the demand side of things, they wanted to have enough time to be able to communicate what they felt was important about the experience. Fair enough. The 30-second ad won out. But now we don't just get the 30-second ad. We also then get a 30-second playable, which we can't skip. We also then are held on the store page for 30 seconds. Now, for me, where a lot of the mobile experiences have a kind of time window of about 90 seconds of interruptibility. What I mean by that is if I don't feel I can break out the experience in 90 seconds, I'm going to choose a different game. That's what I observe as a typical mobile experience. And now choosing to watch an ad is going to take up all that 90 seconds.
So I can tell you a story about this because I know exactly what happened, right?
Please.
So basically believe it was the fall of 2021, right? So a genius team at Iron Source basically realized that if they made rewarded ads 50 seconds long and had difficulty with end cards, so annoying end cards or 6 or 5 clicks to exit the ad, then essentially
X away.
they basically realized that they will have more clicks and thus more downloads, which means that their margins increase and the revenue increases, right? I don't know how much, but basically 2 weeks later, a plugin copied them and basically did the same thing. Now all networks do it, and it's basically a race to the bottom because it's an arms race, right?
Yes.
So now rewarded ads can be upwards of 120 seconds long on some networks.
Yeah.
And that is where you essentially need to manage this through ad monetization, because you can actually have dialogues with networks to basically set these limits on what networks are allowed to show in your app. However,
Absolutely.
networks are very reluctant to do this because essentially you're asking them to decrease their margins. And that's where one of the most unfair components in ad monetization comes in, but it's very much like real life. So the bigger you are in terms of daily ad revenue, the more concessions you as a publisher will be able to extract from networks, which is unfair, but that's how the world works.
Yeah. And actually, to be fair, I mean, particularly app loving, I found actually responded pretty well when I asked them to change that behavior. So, like I say, a conversation is, I think, essential to make sure you get the best experience. But like you say, the world is where it is. I think the only way that's going to change if there's significant unified response by game developers to effectively reward those teams that behave in a more developer friendly way. But the power currently isn't in the hands of most developers, like you say. So I think what we've painted so far is a basic principle of how the infrastructure of ad systems operate and the bidding process. We've talked about some of the current challenges inside the space in terms of the positioning of data and also the time of delivery of ads. So these are the frames that we're within. Now let's get into the sort of the deep side of like what that means from us as a game developer trying to build a game economy. And I'm particularly focused on rewarded ads. I would be, after all, that was my job when I was at Unity Ads. But even things like the role of a banner ad, the role of an interstitial, and the way that they can be leveraged in a game effectively, and like I say, the balance between annoying and not annoying people is a really interesting one we should get into in more detail. Let's start with a banner ad though. So where would you think a banner ad is useful?
So a banner ad is useful. It's the lowest ECPM, but it's also not very intrusive, right? So typically banner ads make sense if you have a lot of users that basically are doing something that has a long gameplay, right? So think about Tetris, some of the word games, basically where you have maybe average playtime per day, session time is anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes, very long. Because essentially to earn any money from banner ads, you need to have a high impression per DAU. And that only happens if you have long gameplay. So long gameplay is where it works. And then you can take it a step further if you're an honest developer or a dishonest developer. So you can place the banner ad close to clickable areas if you're a dishonest one, because you'll get a lot of misclicks, or you can put it at the top where you won't get a lot of misclicks and you'll thus have lower ECPM.
Well, I do remember with that in mind that there was a report done back in the
I remember that one.
2014 era. I think it was like 40. I forgot who said it, but it was like 40% of banner clicks were either fraudulent or accidental, and that's huge. But like you say, I think that doesn't. What I'm trying to get across is I think it's still a valid mechanism, particularly where the area of real estate isn't disproportionately interrupting the player experience. Because I'm focused very much on, I want to be the good guy, I want to be the ethical, but I also want to make my games insanely profitable. And to my mind, it's understanding the equation, the relationship equation between what is that real estate doing for the player, and if that banner ad is there, is the marginal utility of that banner ad being there for me as a developer worth the lost real estate that would allow people to play the game in a more deep way that would then lead on to whether it's, IAP spend, subscription, or, and they can be indirect, they don't have to be direct, or watching more rewarded ads. To me, that's the fundamental question. How do you look at that equation?
So that, I think, was a very valid way of thinking about it. That's very valid what you're saying. But basically, there's been a lot of changes in both. So basically, let me tie this back to user acquisition because it will make a lot more sense, right? So user acquisition has gotten a lot more sophisticated lately. So basically, what you can do now, for example, is you can run IAP campaigns that optimize to finding users that make purchases. So you're optimizing towards a purchase event. You could make something called a ad ROAS campaign, where essentially you're optimizing for users that watch a lot of ads. And you can run blended ROAS that basically does both, right? So like we said before, Oscar and Felix are different in our experience, right? And basically, banner ads, interstitials, and rewarded are good for different things, right? And basically, how you think about it should be from a segmentation point of view. There is a game called Hexasort, which is made by Lion Studios, which is owned by AppLovin. It has a yearly run rate of about $250 million. And basically, I think about 70% of that is IAP and 30% of that is ad revenue. we've covered it on the podcast, but essentially what they did, they had tremendous amount of innovation in this game because segmentation used to be done by geo, which wasn't that effective. But basically what they started doing was segmenting based on what type of user acquisition campaign brought the user. So if you think about the brilliance there is that they moved the segmentation from post-install to pre-install. So for example, if an IAP campaign brought the users, you don't see banners or interstitials for the first 3 days, right? If you think about the first time user experience, after that for 2 days, you don't see any of these intrusive formats that basically chases premium users away. But if an organic user or if a ad ROAS user, they basically show banners and interstitials after the first level. So yeah, it's genius. So basically that's how I would say about that, right? If you do segmentation properly, like you got to have IAP revenue and ad revenue to do segmentation, but like if you do it properly, then in my opinion, probably is a bit aggressive because I'm an ad monetization person, but in my opinion, basically you should have a different experience for the different types of users. And then when you use banners, interstitials, and reward, it shouldn't really matter as much.
But isn't that the point, that we are in a place where we are able to make these kind of strategic deliveries based around our understanding of what the players want? And essentially what you defined for me is as valid as me talking about monetization from IAP validity and player utility. You're still talking about player utility. The players you're referring to with satisfied with ads look at the ads as a way of delivering the value they're expecting. And that match is what matters, not our personal intention about what an ad. I mean, the number of particularly indie developers who get overly distressed about the idea of putting ads into a game. I find in particular, I find it annoying where people go, yeah, but I'll just put in an IAP that it takes the ads away. And I just think, they can, but that's like missing the whole bloody point. There is an audience out there. Yeah.
There's a famous saying that you can't eat retention, or you can't eat it's a method of like monetization, right? And basically in games, the most successful game developers I've worked with are the ones that don't have any preconcessions and basically test everything. So the teams that test the most are the ones that win. So basically, instead of saying we're going to add the IAP, they test it. And basically testing is the key to happiness, essentially, because we don't know what the users want because we need to test it, right? So there's so many times that like what I thought was going to be more profitable wasn't, and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
So
No, exactly. And I think to your example, I remember having a long conversation with another developer about interstitials, and I'd got to the stage where I was kind of seeing the data I was seeing was saying, it's not worth the hassle. We were seeing too many people churning, and so the long-term lifetime value was diminishing at too great a rate. But then I saw the data from this other game, and it was like, actually, when he took interstitials out, he was completely losing a significant proportion of his revenue. And actually, what was better was to think about the placement of where the interstitial should be, not removing of it. And I still think to this day, my favorite way of seeing that placement is in a game called Dumb Ways to Die. Dumb Ways to Die Mobile had this thing where you could play. And when you went back to the menu, that's when you got the interstitial ad. So this was the point where you had intensity, and the ad itself became relaxation. The very same thing that we then saw later, I think, driving hyper casual as a medium.
Yeah, it's a perfect way of saying it. Yeah.
So again, banner ads, we're talking about. I think banner ads. Well, I think you could argue in-world ads are essentially just another kind of banner. I mean, that's a little bit more dubious. I happen to be a bit of a fan of those kind of ads, provided they're contextual. I do think we are a little bit oversensitive about the contextuality, though. To be fair, for example, having a Coke ad in a fantasy world, does that break immersion or not? I think, it's how you present it. And it's difficult because
some players don't care, right? Some players just don't care. Yeah. You might assume that everyone wants to build a pretty game, but the fact is, if you look in the App Store, there is a lot of garbage that you think wouldn't be very popular. That is very, 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 gets millions of downloads, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'd be happy for 10% of some of the money that some of those garbage games make.
Yeah.
But then similarly, I think, if you look at something like in the original in-world ad, I think it was Splinter Cell, when massive back in the day, they had a pizza box. I think it was Papa John's pizza box. The issue there wasn't that pizza boxes weren't a thing you could do. The issue was that once that it had been established that was Papa John's, Domino's weren't willing to pay to replace them.
No.
And I think there's that other side of the story with these kind of things. It's like, if we want to use brand affiliation as a secondary benefit from having a banner ad or an in-world thing, are we actually going to get that secondary benefit? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, so I find that fascinating. So banner ads, I think it has this place. I think particularly where the world doesn't change. Like Tetris is a perfect space. A lot of word games are perfect, especially because there aren't always a lot of other vectors in some of those games that make sense. Hints aren't very good to buy in bundles. It feels a little unsatisfying to pay to remove my ability to need to work harder, if that makes sense. The whole point of a word game is that I'm clever. If I buy hints, I'm admitting failure, and buying failure does not feel good. But a banner ad, fine, no problem, I get it. Okay, but then it's down to the ad to be attractive. Video interstitials we've talked about, rewarded we've talked about. What sort of things? So in a reward, where it's an optional thing, it's a choice that we make. What are the techniques about using and placing rewarded ads? And in particular, I'm interested in what rewards should look like. I'm particularly interested in what you think about that.
So I think the game I would recommend anyone to play that I think is the most genius in terms of rewarded ads is Cup Heroes by Voodoo, which came out quite recently. And it's simply genius because basically what they've done is they've disconnected the rewarded ad mechanism from the core economy of the gameplay. So basically every run that you do, it takes about 10 minutes. Basically, it's a core gameplay, the core loop. And basically, that in every core loop, you have 13 rewarded ad opportunities. And typically, you play 3 runs per day, is what it says in Sensor Tower, right? But the beautiful thing, what they've done there is basically you can earn more cups and earn more weaponry in the core loop, but it has nothing to do with actually the other like longer term core loops. So what they've done there is actually separated the rewards you're actually getting. And I think it's the first time I've seen that done so elegantly. So Cup Heroes is one that I would recommend to play because the amount of rewarded ads they stack up there is insane. But usually the main thing about rewarded ads is they just need to be visible, they need to solve a problem, and they need to be worth watching, right? So if you think about it, usually what you say as a ad viewer rate, percentage of users that see the placement, that also interact with it, what's considered good or average is about 45%. So that is 45% of users that see your rewarded ad placement also interact with it.
Yeah.
The thing that most developers that I work with don't realize, specifically indies, is that to actually earn a lot of ad revenue, you need to have users watching a lot of ads, right? It can't just be 1 or 2. Like, in order to have like a meaningful impact on your underlying LTV for rewarded videos, you need 45% of your user base to watch at least 5 or 6 rewarded ads per day, or you won't be generating, over day 14 with a normal loss, maybe you'll generate anywhere between 60 to $1, right? 60 cents to $1, right? So you need to watch a lot of ads and you need to create basically the mechanisms that allow for that to happen. Otherwise, your ad revenue is going to be very small.
Yeah, it is a numbers game at the end of the day. And the ease of getting into it, the ease of the reduced barrier to access that ad and the value that represents to you as a player, not necessarily in real terms, but in terms of your perceived value, is critical in my head. There used to be a kind of like rule of thumb, which I always used to have in my head about what the actual value of receipt on average an ad should be. We always used to say it was about 2 cents. Is that still the case, or is that the wrong way to think about it?
It's so different from game to game, right? Like, yeah, it's hard to say, right? 2 cents, 1 cent, like that's generally what you'll get paid for a rewarded impression, between 1 cent and 3 in the States, but it's not the same in India, right? Like it's hard to say. Yeah, depends on the game. There's so many factors to say, right? So it's hard to price in.
But it's not ridiculous. I think your point though is more important. And one of the things that I find interesting is that what's 2 cents of value to a person at the beginning of play is not necessarily what's 2 cents of value to somebody later. In fact, quite often, thinking about the 2 cents of value to the experienced long-term player is vastly overvalued, arguably, for the initial player. What is a health potion to somebody right down the end of the line? Well, for me as a starting out player, it's massive. And you can use that in your design strategy to ensure that players feel good early on, but equally, you've got to be careful that you're not overinflating the price expectation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
the thing I would say to any aspiring developer is that you'd be surprised how many ads users are willing to watch. Like, I used to manage a lot of idle games where basically we were averaging, I think, 18 rewarded ads on 70% of the user base per day.
Yeah.
Which is a long time if you think about an ad being 30 seconds, and even longer if there's 120 seconds, right? So, yeah.
You're right, exactly. Well, you make a good point, because I remember back in the early days that we saw there was no specific cap, no consequence of repeated ad use on lifetime value at all. Now, we're talking about like 2014 era, and it's probably changed somewhat since then, but we definitely did not see any cannibalization. We didn't see any negative impact, provided those ads made sense. Provided they didn't just bash you in the head constantly to stop you from playing. We found that was a problem. But if you were smarter about the way you placed it, there was no cannibalization. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I mean, usually ads trade off retention, and that's what you usually lose, right? So usually the main thing when I say with ads is they absolutely destroy your retention, especially with long end cards and long ads, right? So banners and interstitials absolutely destroy your retention. So basically that's how you think about it, right? And that's also why segmentation in these games basically takes out banners and interstitial, but keeps in rewarded, because basically it's also a mechanism to reward players without paying. And also, I guess that's where offer wall kind of comes in, because basically typically offer wall users are majority people who are payers, because it tends to be like a bonus that they get on top, right? So it's everyone's quite rational, but rewarded videos is like something that's kept in usually, right? And it adds on top if done right. And what I mean with done right is it needs to be considered from the early stages of the game design. If you have a game that's been out for 6 years, you slap on some rewarded ads, that never works. It doesn't scale. Maybe you're able to get some small percentages out of it, but it's never going to make a big impact, right?
So, let's go into rewarded ads a little bit. Offer wall a little bit. And the reason I'm keen to is because I know I am biased against them as a personal thing, player-wise. I also know I'm wrong, and it has been an effective system for a very long time. We used to do stuff with Tapjoy a long time ago. So I know I've not let it get in my way, but I know I have a personal grudge against it. Could I just get you to quickly explain what an offer wall is and how they work? But I'm particularly interested in why you think they work for the cohort that like them.
So offer wall is this ghastly, ugly thing that you can put in your game that usually looks quite bad, but basically, essentially, is where users can go to a wall and basically they can click on different offers there, and basically the offers make users do things. So it can be download this game and play it for 15 levels, download this game and play it for 15 minutes, go into Amazon and make an account, all these type of things that basically rewards you quite highly in the game. And these advertisers, since it's quite like a big threshold to do, like a lot of things they need to do, you can get quite high rewards in the game for doing these things, right? So what you're monetizing here is like a big LTV event, which means that the ECPMs in offer walls that you're getting paid out tend to be between $300 to $600. So very high. And if you get 12% of a user base to even go to the offer wall, that's considered very good. Basically, they look quite bad. And it's probably the space that's heated up the most in the last couple of years, where basically companies like Misplay, Adjo have moved in on Tapjoy and Digital Turbine. And essentially, we counted it on the 2.5 Gamers podcast a couple of months ago, and we counted, 36 new companies in this space. So basically it works, and it works extremely well, both for the publisher and for user acquisition. So it works super well.
And who doesn't like a special offer? At the end of the day, that's how they're presented. It's like, here's a special thing I can get. I know in the old days there used to be a lot of real money style discounting kind of offers as well. I don't know if that's still the case. But, like I say, we can't discount these methods. They do exist. So we talked a bit about the design factor. I mean, one of the things for me that I find very useful for rewarding is where I can introduce new features and functions that are premium and essentially set a value to them as part of their introduction. So for example, maybe I've got a new skin that happens to give you some speed bonus. I'll give you the chance to get a trial use of it for say 3 plays by watching the ad. And then once that's completed, I might then offer you a discount on purchasing it, but that will be a one-time only discount. I will never discount it to you again type thing. I found that has worked really well to eventually give perceived value to particular new features and functions that I want to sell people. Again, I'm using an analogy. I've seen it used in lots of different levels, lots of different ways. I'm just using it as a way of describing the process. Are there smart mechanisms of using these various ad forms that you've seen, different techniques that allow us to change other things than just straight revenue, but, maybe affecting long-term retention or perception or reception to other things?
So basically, if I'm formulating your question right, like where rewarded videos tend to work the best, or where were you going with that question?
I was more trying to what there's lots of different forms of ads. There are lots of different ways we can use them, but it's beyond the ad monetization revenue benefit to get other benefits in gameplay. Are there techniques that you've seen that you find are interesting that do more than just generate revenue?
Yeah, so basically, if we go also into segmentation, I know there's some interesting work that's been done by some companies where they basically look at eCPM and basically have that as an indicator of the value of a user. Because essentially, if an eCPM of a specific user is high, then essentially that is a signal that that user is valuable to networks, right? And what I've heard clever game developers do is use it as an indicator for showing them less ads, because essentially they think they can drive IAPs with that. So I know of a game called Colorwood Sort by Bernie Games that basically looks at eCPM value, and what they do is if the eCPM is high, they show less ads to that user.
That's clever.
Yeah.
That's clever. By consequence, so we're focusing on the retention of that user, and then each time they see an ad, they're going to get more value out of that ad. Love it. Very smart.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing, is that what I'm trying to get across is that ads are not just a emotionless thing that we chuck in because we just want to exploit people and get as much money out of them as possible. We do want money out of people, absolutely, because we're making commercial products, but we can be smart about it. The one thing I was going to sort of go on to, you look at a whole bunch of like the scope. Are there particular lessons that you think that we've learned as we've seen the transition and the movement of the way the ad space has operated? What should we be doing as designers to think about how we can be prepared for where ads go next?
Well, the sad truth is, like, it's a race to the bottom in terms of end cards, so that's only going to get worse and worse. So basically, we'll get paid less for ads as publishers, but the smartphone and the App Store market as a whole is not going anywhere, right? I can't think of any other place where you can access 1.2 billion people and basically get direct payments access to these. And until kind of the iPhone and the Androids go away as a platform, that basically the App Store is going to be around. And as long as the App Stores are around, 50% of users will download basically apps from paid, right? So it's something that's not going away, and it's something that people don't mind. Right. So basically embrace it, and embrace it early on. And you actually might be able to, build the business out of it, be very clever about it, right? But the key is that you need to have a lot of users that watch a lot of ads, and then you're able to earn significant ad revenue. But there is a lot of companies that have made a lot of money from ads and only ad revenue, and also splitting it between. So not being scared and having this 10-year-old mindset like from 10 years ago of what ads is in the games, because they exist in all the games, right? There's no way that anyone on the App Store has not interacted with an ad, right? So embrace it. And also, I also like to add, which is a bit maybe a naive point of view, is like essentially you're giving back to the ecosystem, right? Because discoverability is so bad that if you actually enable ads to be shown, you're helping out the whole ecosystem.
100% agree. 100% agree. In fact, with that in mind, and again, I think I know where this question will end up. What about other platforms? Do you think we'll ever see ads hit the PC space?
I mean, they're there, but they're not there in the same extent, right? It's like there's no rewarded ad really. It's interstitials and banners, right? And the way they do mediation on PC is way more sophisticated. We'll see. I think the biggest shakeup that could potentially happen is that Apple and Google will lose the right to not have any other app stores on their devices. We'll see what happens there. That could be quite interesting, getting a new entrant. Until the platforms of iOS and Android go away for some new thing, I don't know, smart glasses or I don't know, whatever, ads will be a thing on mobile, and they will be extremely effective.
Exactly. And that's exactly where we should leave it. Felix, that's been fantastic. Thank you very much for taking the time out. If people want to find out more about what you do and the other podcasts that you're on, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I'm on a podcast that we release twice a week called 2.5 Gamers, and we talk about everything from UA, ad monetization to game design. Yeah, if you want to reach out to me, felixbraberg.com if you have any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Felix. Much appreciated. So if you like that, enjoyed that, please like, comment, share, tell other people. Go check out 2.5 Gamers. It's fantastic. And also, we'll be back again talking to more game developers about making games, game economies, and game balance. So thank you very much.